The 52-year-old CEO had chosen this exact bench, this exact time to end it all. 3 years after losing his wife and daughter, Richard Bennett saw no point in continuing. The pills waited in his pocket, then a small voice interrupted. "Excuse me, sir, can I sit here?" A pale girl, maybe 4, stood clutching a teddy bear, hospital bracelet on her thin wrist, eyes too wise for her age. Before he could refuse, she sat down and handed him half her graham cracker. "You look sad," she said simply. "Sad people need to eat too." Her name was Lily, and she was dying of cancer. Yet here she was, sharing her snack with a stranger who had forgotten that kindness still existed in the world. Richard watched from the corner of his eye as the girl settled beside him, her feet dangling inches above the ground. She arranged her teddy bear carefully on her lap, smoothing its matted fur with gentle fingers. The silence between them felt different from his usual solitude, fuller somehow, like a room with 2 people reading different books. He had chosen this particular bench 3 years ago for its isolation, tucked away from the main paths where joggers and dog walkers rarely ventured. Now, for the first time, he wondered if perhaps the bench had chosen him. The girl reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small packet of graham crackers, the kind sold in hospital vending machines. She broke one in half with practiced precision, then extended one piece toward him without a word. Richard stared at the offering, his throat suddenly tight. His daughter Emma had loved graham crackers, would break them exactly the same way, always sharing even when she had so little. He accepted the cracker with a quiet thank you, the first words he had spoken in hours. "I'm Lily," the girl said simply, taking a small bite of her half. "Like the flower, but my mom said I was more like a wildflower, growing in unexpected places." She spoke with the matter-of-fact tone children use when discussing profound things, unaware of their depth. Richard cleared his throat, the cracker turning to dust in his mouth. "I'm Richard," he managed, though the name felt strange on his tongue, as if he had forgotten who that person was supposed to be. Lily nodded as if she had expected nothing less, then turned her attention to a cluster of pigeons pecking at the frozen ground nearby. She tossed them cracker crumbs with careful aim, ensuring each bird got its share. "They remember faces, she said conversationally. "If you're mean to them, they tell their friends. But if you're nice, they remember that too." Richard found himself almost smiling at her earnestness, a sensation so foreign it startled him. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches overhead, and Lily coughed again, longer this time, pressing her teddy bear against her chest as if it could help her breathe. Richard felt the familiar urge to leave, to retreat to his penthouse where other people's pain couldn't touch him. But something in the girl's determined straightening of her small shoulders kept him seated. She had the look of someone who had grown accustomed to difficult things, a recognition he understood too well. "This is Patches," Lily said once her breathing steadied, holding up the teddy bear for his inspection. "He's been with me through everything. 2 surgeries, 17 chemo sessions, and 56 nights in the hospital. He never complains." The words landed between them like stones thrown in deep water, ripples expanding outward. Richard's hands clenched involuntarily. This child, this tiny person with graham cracker crumbs on her chin, was fighting a battle that made his boardroom conflicts seem like children's games. Richard Bennett was 52 years old, CEO of Bennett Industries, master of leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers. He lived in a penthouse apartment that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, drove cars that turned heads, wore watches that could fund college educations. But for 3 years, none of it had mattered. Every Thursday at 4:30, he came to this bench because it was here he had taught Emma to ride her bike, here where Sarah had laughed at his jokes, here where his life had been whole before a phone call shattered everything. The accident had happened on a Tuesday. Sarah was driving Emma to her science fair, the one she had prepared for weeks. Emma wore her lucky socks, the purple ones with butterflies, because she said they made her feel brave. Richard was supposed to drive them, had promised to leave the office early, but a crisis with the Singapore merger had kept him chained to his desk. "Go ahead without me," he had said. "I'll meet you there." Famous last words. The truck driver who ran the red light was texting. Sarah and Emma died on impact. Richard had been reviewing contracts when his world ended. Now he carried his guilt like a stone in his chest, heavy and unchanging. The company thrived under his robotic leadership, profits soaring as he worked 18-hour days to avoid the emptiness of home. His brother Michael called weekly, trying to pull him back to the living, but Richard had perfected the art of deflection. He ate because his body required fuel. He slept because exhaustion demanded it. He existed because dying would be too easy, and he deserved the harder punishment of continuing. "That's a lot for one bear to handle," Richard heard himself say, surprising them both. Lily studied him with eyes that seemed older than her 4 years, the kind of gaze that saw through expensive suits and careful facades. "He's good at his job," she said simply. "Everyone needs someone who stays, even when things get scary." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. As the light began to fade, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lily's grandmother appeared at the park entrance. Margaret Patterson moved with the measured steps of someone carrying more weight than just years, her hospital cafeteria uniform visible beneath her open coat. Her face transformed from worry to relief when she spotted Lily, then shifted to wary concern as she noticed Richard. "There you are, sweetheart," she called, her voice carrying both love and exhaustion. Lily jumped up with surprising energy, then paused, looking back at Richard. "I come here every Thursday after my appointment," she said, as if issuing an invitation wrapped in information. "The doctors say routine is important for healing." She waved goodbye with her free hand, patches tucked securely under her arm, and skipped toward her grandmother with the resilient joy of children who have learned to find light in darkness. Richard remained on the bench long after they disappeared, the space beside him somehow more empty than before. He pulled out his phone, seeing 17 missed calls from his assistant, 3 from board members, and 1 from his brother Michael. All of them could wait. Instead, he found himself thinking about pigeons with good memories and teddy bears that never complained. For the first time in 3 years, 4:30 on Thursday felt less like a sentence and more like a possibility. The following Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring that made people forget winter wasn't finished. Richard arrived at the bench at 4:25, telling himself he was simply early for his usual appointment with solitude. But his eyes betrayed him, scanning the park paths for a small figure in an oversized pink jacket. At exactly 4:32, Lily appeared, moving more slowly than the week before, but with the same determined stride. "You came back," she said, settling beside him with obvious relief. Richard realized she had been uncertain too, this child who spoke of routine and healing with the wisdom of someone thrice her age. "So did you," he replied, offering a small smile that felt rusty from disuse. She pulled out graham crackers again, this time from a Ziploc bag decorated with hand-drawn butterflies. "Grandma says I should eat more, but food tastes funny after treatment. Except these. These always taste right." They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing crackers and watching pigeons, the silence between them comfortable like an old sweater. Lily told him about her week in segments, the way 4-year-olds do, jumping from her favorite nurse who wore funny socks to the mean technician who couldn't find her veins to the way sunlight made rainbows through the IV bags. Richard found himself listening with an attention he hadn't given anything in years, each detail painting a picture of a life lived fully despite its limitations. "What do you do?" Lily asked suddenly, fixing him with those 2 wise eyes. "When you're not here, I mean. Grandma says everyone has a job, even if it's just getting better." Richard hesitated, wondering how to explain corporate acquisitions and quarterly reports to a 4-year-old who measured time in treatment cycles. "I run a company," he said finally. "We make things that help other businesses work better." It sounded hollow even to his own ears, like describing a symphony as organized noise. Lily nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the same gravity she gave to pigeon behavior. "That sounds lonely," she said after a moment. "Making things work better, but not making things better, you know?" The distinction cut through him like a blade, sharp and true. He had spent 3 years making his company more efficient, more profitable, more everything except meaningful. The realization sat heavy in his chest, next to all the other things he tried not to feel. Margaret Patterson's story emerged over the following weeks, painted in broad strokes during her brief appearances at the bench. She was 63 years old, had raised her daughter alone after her husband died in Afghanistan, had worked whatever jobs she could find to keep them afloat. Her daughter Rebecca had been her miracle, the child she had waited 10 years to conceive, the bright light that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Rebecca became a teacher, 3rd grade, because she said 8-year-olds were the perfect age, still believing in magic but able to tie their own shoes. Then Rebecca got sick, Not the kind of sick that responds to treatment and positive thinking, but the kind that steals pieces of you day by day. She fought for 2 years, long enough to see Lily's second birthday, to record videos for all the birthdays she would miss, to write letters for kindergarten and high school and all the moments mothers are supposed to witness. She died on a Tuesday morning in spring, holding Lily's hand and Margaret's, telling them to take care of each other. Now Margaret worked 2 jobs to pay for Lily's treatment, her days a careful choreography of hospital schedules and shift work. She had sold their house, moved to a small apartment near the hospital, given up everything that could be given up. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford when her granddaughter needed medicine that cost more than she earned in a month. But she carried herself with dignity, this woman who had buried a husband and a daughter and still got up every morning because a sick child needed her. Lily's cancer had been diagnosed 2 years ago, a word that changed everything. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the doctors said, as if naming the monster made it less frightening. The survival rates were good, they promised, 70% with proper treatment. But proper treatment meant chemicals that made her hair fall out, that turned her stomach into a battlefield, that stole her energy and her appetite and sometimes her hope. Still, she faced it all with a grace that humbled the adults around her, finding joy in small victories and peace in routine. My mom used to say that courage isn't not being scared, Lily told Richard one Thursday, her small voice steady despite the big words. It's being scared and doing the thing anyway. Like when I have to get the big needle, the one that goes in my chest, I'm always scared, but I think about after, how Grandma will be proud, and maybe I'll get a popsicle, and I do it anyway. She demonstrated this courage constantly, in ways small and large, teaching by example that bravery had many faces. Their bench became a sanctuary for more than just Richard and Lily. Sometimes Margaret would join them, too tired to pretend she wasn't worried, finding comfort in their strange triangle of shared silence. Sometimes other patients from the children's ward would appear, drawn by Lily's easy acceptance and Richard's quiet presence. A boy named Marcus, who was fighting the same battle. A teenager named Ashley, whose prosthetic leg told its own story of survival. They formed an informal club, the Thursday Graham Cracker Club, bound by nothing more than proximity and the understanding that some things were too big to face alone. One Thursday, Lily brought a photo album, its pages carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. "This is my mom," she said, showing Richard pictures of a woman who looked like Lily might in 30 years, all bright eyes and stubborn chin. There were photos of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, of a golden dog named Biscuit, of a life that had been ordinary until it wasn't. She was the best mommy, Lily said proudly. She read stories with funny voices and made pancakes shaped like butterflies. Richard found himself sharing too, words flowing like water through a broken dam. He told them about Emma's butterfly obsession, how she wore wings to the grocery store and insisted everyone call her Monarch. About Sarah's laugh, the way it started as a giggle and built into something that filled rooms. About Sunday pancakes and bedtime stories and the 1,000 small moments that make a family. About the last morning when Emma had hugged him goodbye and said, "See you at the science fair, Daddy. I'm going to win first place for sure." The day everything changed started like any other Thursday. Richard waited at the bench, checking his watch as 4:30 became 4:45, then 5 o'clock. The familiar weight of dread settled in his stomach as he walked to the hospital, his steps quick and purposeful. He found Margaret in the lobby, her face etched with exhaustion and barely controlled panic. Behind her, a doctor spoke in low, measured tones, the kind that meant bad news delivered gently. "She collapsed at school," Margaret said, her voice hollow. "The treatment isn't working anymore. The cancer cells are adapting, getting stronger. There's an experimental therapy, but..." She stopped, unable to voice the number that meant the difference between hope and despair. $200,000. For Richard, it was nothing, a rounding error in his vast wealth. For Margaret, it might as well have been 200 million. Richard stood frozen in the harsh fluorescent light, his mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with money. He could write a check right now, hand it to this woman who had been Atlas carrying the world on minimum wage. But something held him back, Sarah's voice echoing in his memory. "Money doesn't solve problems, Richard. It just changes their shape." He had bought the safest car, hired the best drivers, and death had found them anyway. "Take me to her," he said instead, and Margaret led him through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Lily looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, machines beeping their electronic lullabies around her. But when her eyes opened, they still held that uncanny brightness, that spark that refused to be dimmed. "You found me," she whispered, managing a smile. "I knew you would. You're very reliable for a sad person." The next days passed in a blur of medical consultations and legal maneuvering. Richard tried to arrange an anonymous donation through his lawyer, a clean solution that would provide the money without the complications of personal involvement. But hospital bureaucracy had its own requirements, forms, and attestations that made true anonymity impossible. And Lily, even weakened, proved as stubborn as her grandmother. "I don't take charity from strangers," she declared with surprising force. "If someone's helping me, I need to know why." Margaret's suspicion was equally fierce, sharpened by years of protecting what little she had from those who would take advantage. "Rich people don't help without wanting something," she said bluntly when Richard's lawyer approached her. "What is it you want? You can't buy her. She's not some replacement for whatever you lost." The words hit their target with precision, forcing Richard to examine his own motives with uncomfortable honesty. Was he trying to save Lily, or was he trying to rewrite history, to prove that money could matter when it hadn't before? The question tormented him through sleepless nights, Sarah's face mixing with Lily's in his dreams until he couldn't separate his grief from his growing affection for this brave, dying child. He thought about walking away, returning to his safe numbness, but the image of Lily alone in that hospital bed made retreat impossible. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but Lily took matters into her own small hands. Despite strict orders to rest, she convinced a sympathetic nurse to wheel her to the hospital's public area where Richard sat. "You're both being silly," she announced. Patches clutched like a judge's gavel. "Grandma, he's not trying to buy me. He's trying to buy himself permission to care again. And Mr. Richard, you can't save your daughter by saving me, but maybe you can save yourself. Isn't that worth something?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard felt laid bare, dissected by a 4-year-old's wisdom. "My mom's last words to me," Lily continued softly, were, "Find someone who needs you and be their light. I picked you, Mr. Richard. Was that okay? Because you looked like someone who had forgotten what light looked like." The pure grace of her acceptance, the gift of being chosen by this remarkable child, broke something open in Richard's chest. "I think," he said slowly, his voice thick with emotion, "that your mother was very wise, and I think Emma would have loved to know you." It was the first time he had spoken of his daughter in terms of possibility rather than loss. Margaret watched this exchange with the fierce protectiveness of a grandmother, but something in her stance softened. Perhaps she recognized the authenticity of his pain, or perhaps she simply saw what Lily saw, a man drowning who had forgotten how to swim. "Then help us," Margaret said quietly. "Not as charity, but as family. Because that's what we do, right? We show up for each other." The word family hung in the air, foreign and familiar at once. Richard looked at these two survivors, bound by loss and love, and felt something shift. Not healing, not yet, but the possibility of it. A door opening where he had thought there were only walls. The treatment began 2 weeks later, a cocktail of chemicals with names like poetry and effects like warfare. Richard rearranged his entire life around the hospital schedule, conducting board meetings from Lily's room, making million-dollar decisions between her naps. His executives grew accustomed to the sound of beeping machines in the background, to meetings interrupted by Lily's commentary. "Tell them they're being greedy," she advised during one particularly tense negotiation. "Nobody needs that much money." The treatment was brutal, worse than anything she had endured before. Days when she couldn't keep water down, when her skin felt like fire, when even patches couldn't comfort her. On the worst days, she asked Richard to tell Emma stories, and he became a storyteller by necessity, spinning his daughter's life into threads that could hold Lily to this world. He told her about Emma's failed attempts to whistle, about her conviction that butterflies were just flowers that learned to fly, about the time she tried to adopt 17 caterpillars. Margaret took leave from both jobs, something Richard arranged without asking, knowing her pride would have refused if given the choice. She set up camp in the hospital room, creating a nest of familiar things: photos, Lily's favorite blanket, battery-powered fairy lights that made the medical equipment less frightening. The three of them formed a unit, bound by shared vigil and the dark humor that only comes from staring down death together. Slowly, impossibly, the treatment began to work. The cancer cells retreated like an army facing superior forces, surrendering ground they had held too long. Each test brought better news, numbers moving in directions that made doctors smile cautiously. "We don't use the word miracle," her oncologist said carefully, "but this is definitely encouraging." Lily, ever practical, demanded concrete definitions. "How encouraging? Like maybe ice cream for dinner encouraging, or definitely ice cream for dinner encouraging." 3 months into treatment, Richard found himself back at their bench on a Thursday afternoon. It was 4:30 exactly, but he was alone. Lily was still too fragile for outdoor excursions, her immune system rebuilding like a city after siege. He sat in their spot, graham crackers in his pocket, and tried to name the feeling in his chest. Not happiness exactly, too complex for that simple word. More like spring after endless winter, inevitable and surprising at once. A pigeon landed near his feet, head cocked with what looked like recognition. "She's getting better," Richard told it, feeling only slightly foolish. "The treatment is working. She's going to make it." The bird pecked at the ground expectantly, and Richard threw it some crackers. As he watched it eat, he thought about Lily's theory of pigeon memory, how kindness created its own network of remembrance. Recovery was not linear, a lesson Richard learned through setbacks and small victories. But gradually, incrementally, Lily grew stronger. Color returned to her cheeks like dawn breaking. The day she walked the entire hospital corridor without resting, everyone celebrated. "Next stop, Central Park," she declared, already planning their reunion. Margaret wept that day, 3 years of accumulated fear finally releasing its grip. The day of Lily's discharge arrived with spring in full bloom. Nurses who had become friends gathered to say goodbye, many with tears in their eyes. "You better not come back here except to visit," one said sternly, hugging Lily tight. The walk to Central Park took 3 times longer than usual, Lily insisting on examining everything she had missed. A dog walker with 6 leashes got a detailed consultation on each breed. Finally, they reached their bench. The 3 of them sat in their usual configuration, Richard on one end, Lily in the middle, Margaret on the other side. The pigeons appeared within minutes, displaying the excellent memory Lily had always claimed. She distributed crackers with the solemnity of a communion service. "See," she said to Richard, "they remembered us. Even when we were gone for a long time, they still knew we'd come back." As they sat there, Richard realized this was what healing looked like. Not a dramatic moment of revelation, but a quiet return to simple routines. The ability to sit still without drowning. The courage to care about someone else's tomorrow. He looked at Lily, busy naming a new pigeon, and Margaret, watching her granddaughter with fierce love, and understood that family was not about replacement, but expansion. "I've been thinking," Lily announced, "about what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be a doctor, the kind who helps kids with cancer, because I know what it feels like, and I think that matters." Richard and Margaret exchanged glances over her head, seeing the future she was claiming with such determination. "That's a lot of school," Margaret said carefully. Lily shrugged with the confidence of someone who had faced down death. "That's okay. I'm good at hard things." The following weeks brought a rhythm of recovery and renewal. Richard found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He started eating lunch with people instead of at his desk. He learned his employees' names and their stories. His brother Michael, whom he had pushed away after the funeral, received a call that began with "I'm sorry" and ended with weekly dinners. "It's like you came back to life," Michael said. "I didn't realize how dead you were until you weren't." One Thursday, Richard noticed Lily had been writing in a small notebook. "I want to leave a note," she explained, "for the next sad person who sits here." She wrote carefully, then tucked the paper into a crack in the bench. "What does it say?" Margaret asked. Lily smiled. "It says, 'This bench holds stories. Add yours. P.S. Don't forget to feed the pigeons.'" Over the following months, more notes appeared, tucked into the weathered wood like prayers. Their Thursday gatherings began attracting others, drawn by some invisible signal that here was a place where pain was acknowledged but not allowed to win. A widower who had lost his wife of 60 years. A young mother whose baby had been stillborn. Each person brought their own grief and found it somehow lighter when shared. Lily presided over these informal meetings with natural grace, never offering false comfort but always providing witness. The 1-year anniversary of their first meeting arrived with fanfare. Richard had officially become Lily's legal co-guardian alongside Margaret, not replacing anyone but adding to their unusual family unit. The paperwork was signed at the bench, of course, with their Thursday regulars as witnesses. "So what do I call you?" Lily had asked. After much deliberation, she settled on simply Richard, but with a possessive emphasis. "My Richard," she would tell people, claiming him with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved. Margaret graduated from nursing school 2 years later, achieving her long-deferred dream with honors. She specialized in pediatric oncology, bringing her hard-won understanding to other families facing the unthinkable. Richard's company transformed under his new leadership philosophy, proving that treating employees as humans rather than resources improved both morale and profits. But more importantly, he had learned to live again, not in spite of his loss, but because of what it had taught him. 5 years after that first Thursday, they still met at the bench. Lily, now 9 and thriving, would race up with friends before stopping to sit for their 5 minutes of tradition. She had been accepted to a special science program for gifted students. Her essay about facing illness with curiosity impressing the selection committee. "I learned from the best teachers," she told Richard and Margaret. "Both of you, and my mom, and even Emma and Sarah. Love doesn't stop teaching just because someone dies." The bench had been officially dedicated by the Parks Department, bearing a small plaque that read, "This bench holds stories. In memory of all those we've loved and lost, and in honor of those who choose to stay." Their Thursday group had inspired similar gatherings in other cities, a quiet movement of people choosing connection over isolation. Richard had established a foundation providing experimental treatment funding for children whose families couldn't afford hope. But the real miracle was simpler than all of that. 3 broken people had chosen each other, had created family from fragments, had discovered that hearts could expand rather than replace. As they sat on their bench that spring afternoon, sharing graham crackers and watching pigeons, Richard thought about the mysterious mathematics of love, how it multiplied when divided, how it grew stronger when given away, how it transformed everything it touched. "Same time next week?" Lily asked, though they all knew the answer. As she ran to rejoin her friends, Richard noticed someone new approaching the bench, that unmistakable look of fresh grief written across their features. He shifted over, making room, remembering another Thursday when a small girl had asked if she could sit. The cycle continued, one shared bench, one offered cracker, one moment of connection at a time. Love, Lily had taught him, didn't end with death. It just changed shape, flowing into new vessels, creating new stories. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it brought you exactly what you needed. A reason to keep showing up, a family you never expected, and the knowledge that even the deepest wounds could heal if you were brave enough to let others see them. All it took was the courage to say yes when someone asked, "Can I sit here?" The answer, Richard had learned, was always yes. The bench would hold whatever stories people brought. And somewhere, perhaps, Emma and Sarah and Lily's mother smiled, knowing their love lived on in every Thursday gathering, every shared cracker, every moment when strangers chose to become family. That was the true miracle, the one that started with 5 simple words and grew into something infinite. "Can I sit here?" Yes, always yes.